He remembered the way she stood in the snow that morning, shaking, barefoot, breath fogging like a dying horse. A woman who looked like she'd already lost more than most folks could bear. The wind wasn't gentle that day. It cut her coat open, slapped her bruises raw, and still she kept walking toward the ridge as if death behind her was worse than death ahead. And when she stumbled, knees hitting the frozen dirt, he thought that was the end of her story. Most people don't rise after falling like that in Dustfell winters, but she did, and the man who stepped out of the storm to face her was the last man she ever expected to see. That was the twist Dustfell whispered about for months. Before we continue, if you're watching this from anywhere in the world, drop your city in the comments. Stay with this story till the end, and don't forget to subscribe for more Western tales. Dustfell Station still looked half asleep when Kane stepped off the freight wagon with Ruthie at his side. The early train was running late again, wheezing like an old mule as it crawled toward the platform. Asher pulled off his hat, smoothed down his hair, and tried to push down the feeling that he'd done something foolish, writing for a mail-order bride at all. But after 2 years of raising his brother's child alone, foolishness sometimes looked a lot like hope. Ruthie clutched a tin lunch pail in both hands, her narrow shoulders tight beneath her patched coat. "Is she really coming today?" she asked, voice low, as if hoping the answer was no. "She is," Asher said. "And you mind your manners, Ruthie Kane." The girl huffed, but kept her eyes on the tracks. She had been polite enough in letters, asking questions about Miss Isabel, the woman who'd written hymns in neat looping script, and said she longed for a quiet life on a ranch. Ruthie hadn't liked any talk of a new woman in the house, but she'd tolerated Isabel. Isabel felt safe, predictable. The train groaned to a stop. Steam hissed out across the platform. People stepped off, travelers, drummers, a family with a crying toddler. Then the crowd thinned, and Asher saw her. The woman was nothing like the letters. She stood alone at the far end of the platform, one hand gripping a scuffed carpet bag, the other holding a small, leather-bound ledger pressed tight against her ribs, as if it were the only thing she owned in the world. Her dress was torn at the sleeve. A yellowed bruise marked one cheek. Dark hair, tangled and wind-burned, fell around a face that should have been young, but looked like it had lived through too many winters already. Asher's steps slowed. "Lord help me." Ruthie tugged his sleeve sharply. "That ain't her," she whispered. But it was. The woman lifted her chin, spotted him, and something like relief and fear flickered through her eyes. She moved toward them, each step careful, almost pained. "Asher Kane?" she asked, softly. Her voice wasn't the warm, confident tone he knew from the letters. It trembled. "Yes, ma'am. I'm Asher." He forced his feet forward, forced the polite calm he'd practiced 100 times. "And this is Ruthie." The girl said nothing. She only stared, eyes narrowing. The woman tried a small smile. "I'm Elena Carrillo." "Not Isabel. Not even close." Asher swallowed. We expected someone else." Something in Elena's face tightened. "I know." She glanced down at her bag. "I'll explain once we're off the platform." Before Asher could answer, the station door swung open behind them. May Dillard, owner of Dillard's boarding house, stepped onto the platform carrying a basket of laundry. She spotted Elena and stopped cold. "Well," May said, voice sharp enough to cut rope. "Kane, Is that the bride you ordered? Heat crawled up Asher's neck. People slowed. A couple of cowhands lingered, pretending not to stare. Ruthie stiffened, inching closer to Asher's coat. Elena dipped her head, jaw clenched hard. She didn't talk back, didn't defend herself, just held that ledger tighter. Asher forced a smile at May. Morning to you, ma'am. He picked up Elena's bag before she could protest. Train's late. Best we head home. May sniffed. Good luck with that one. Elena flinched. Barely, but Asher saw it. He felt something twist inside him. Shame, anger, responsibility. He couldn't name it. They walked toward the wagon. Steam still curled across the platform, drifting around Elena's skirts like smoke. Ruthie leaned close to Asher. She's hurt, she whispered, not in sympathy but suspicion. I see it, he murmured. When he lifted Elena's bag into the wagon, she hesitated at the step. For a heartbeat, Asher thought she might bolt, run back onto the train, vanish into the prairie like a ghost. Instead, she climbed up and folded her hands in her lap. Thank you for coming, she said quietly. Something in her voice, tired, brittle, honest, stopped Asher from saying what sat on his tongue. You're not the woman I wrote to. Ruthie sat stiff as a fence post beside him. Elena sat across, eyes lowered. Asher gathered the reins, flicked them lightly, and the wagon rolled forward. No one spoke. Dustfell's main street watched them pass. Windows cracking open, curtains twitching, a couple of men nudging each other near the smithy. Elena kept her gaze down, shoulders drawn in tight. Asher watched her for a moment, then looked away. He hadn't expected a stranger with bruises. He hadn't expected secrets heavy enough to drag a woman's shoulders like that. And he hadn't expected the first thought in his chest to be the one he hated most. What trouble have I brought into my home? The wagon rattled along the winter-bitten trail that cut through the low hills outside Dustfell. Asher kept his eyes on the horses, jaw tight, reins steady, but Ruthie could tell he wasn't really seeing the road. He looked like a man trying to hold 3 thoughts at once and dropping all of them. Elena sat across from them, hands folded over the charred ledger. She hadn't looked up since leaving the station. Every so often the wagon hit a rut, jarring her shoulder, and she winced like someone used to bracing for blows. Ruthie watched her openly, chin lifted in the way only a child touched by too much loss too early can do. Miss? Ruthie said finally. You look different from the letters. Elena's fingers tightened on the ledger. I know. Asher shot Ruthie a warning look, but the girl pressed on. Did you lie? The question hung in the cold morning air, a clean, sharp thing. Elena swallowed. She didn't meet Ruthie's eyes. She looked at Asher instead, quiet, gauging, as if deciding whether truth would get her thrown off the wagon or merely ignored. I didn't write the letters, she said softly. Asher's hands went still on the reins. Ruthie blinked. Then who did? For a long moment, Elena only breathed. In, out, slow, painful breaths. My sister, she whispered. Isabel. Asher felt something inside him shift, hard and fast, like a horse stumbling under him. Your sister, he repeated. She died 3 months ago. Elena lifted the ledger slightly, not as an explanation, more as a reflex, like she was clutching the last piece of someone she loved. She bought the ticket. She wrote to you. She dreamed of a place where men didn't hurt women the way they hurt her back home. Her voice cracked at the end, small and raw. I only had her ticket left. Ruthie's mouth opened, then closed. She looked at Asher, hoping he'd tell her Elena was lying again. But Asher didn't speak. His knuckles had gone white on the reins. The horses clopped onward, the only sound in the silence that followed. Asher cleared his throat. "You could have told me, before coming." "Yes." Elena's voice was barely more than breath. "But I thought, if I told you Isabel was gone, you wouldn't want—" She cut herself off, shaking her head. "I didn't have anywhere else to go." There it was, the truth, stripped bare. Asher felt the weight of it, heavy, ugly, real. The letters had been full of hymns, gentle words, a steady kind of kindness. He'd read them on long nights when Ruthie cried herself to sleep and the ranch felt too big and too empty. He'd let those letters paint a face he'd never seen. And now that face belonged to a dead woman. He exhaled slowly. "You should have said something." "I know." Elena looked straight ahead, eyes fixed on some point far beyond the hills. "I'm sorry, Asher. I truly am." Ruthie folded her arms, chin, trembling with anger she was too young to understand fully. "That's lying," she said coldly. "That's starting with a lie." Elena didn't argue. She didn't defend herself. She only nodded, accepting the blow. Asher felt something pinch deep in his chest at the sight. He hated dishonesty, but he hated desperation more. And Elena. She wore desperation like a second skin. The wagon hit another rut, bouncing everyone. Elena gasped, gripping the seat with one hand, ledger with the other. Asher saw how her sleeve slid back a little, revealing a fading bruise the size of a thumbprint near her wrist. His jaw tightened. Ruthie saw it too. Her eyes widened. Fear, confusion, something else. No one said a word. They rode in silence until the ranch came into view. Kane Ridge stretching out in a patchwork of fences, sheds, and the long shadow of the barn. Smoke rose thinly from the chimney. It should have looked welcoming. Home always had. But today it looked like a place too small for 3 people carrying this much pain. Asher pulled the wagon to a stop. Before he could step down, Elena finally spoke again. "I didn't mean to deceive you. Isabel. She thought this ranch might save us both." She hesitated, voice trembling. "I hoped she was right." Asher looked at her, at the bruises, the tired eyes, the weight she carried like she'd been born with it. And he thought of how many nights he'd read those letters believing in someone gentle, someone soft. He didn't know what to say, so he said the only thing that fit. "You should have told me sooner." Elena nodded once, the motion small and filled with resignation. "Yes, I should have." Ruthie jumped down from the wagon and walked ahead toward the house, stiff and silent. Elena remained seated for a moment, shoulders curled inward, clutching the ledger like it might vanish if she released it. Asher watched her. There were 100 things he could say, accusations, questions, demands. But when he opened his mouth, none of them came out. Instead, he said quietly, "Come inside. It's cold." Elena lifted her eyes, searching for anger, disgust, rejection. She found none. Just a man trying to figure out what to do with a woman who wasn't the one he'd written to, but was still, somehow, his responsibility now. And that truth settled over both of them like the first hard frost of winter. The front door creaked when Asher pushed it open, letting a draft of cold air slip across the wooden floor. Kane Ridge Ranch wasn't much to look at. Just a sturdy 2-room house with a lean-to kitchen. But it had kept him and Ruthie alive these past years. He'd fixed the roof twice, rebuilt the porch rail, and patched every window but one. The place was rough, but it was theirs. Elena stepped inside like someone entering a church she didn't belong to. Quiet, small, careful not to brush against anything. Her eyes moved around the room, taking in the mantel, the iron stove, the hooks on the wall. She held that ledger like an anchor. Ruthie stomped in behind them, dropping her lunch pail with a loud clatter. "I'll get the fire going," she muttered, as if performing a chore could erase the morning's disappointment. Asher set Elena's carpet bag near the chair and cleared his throat. "This house has rules," he said. "We keep things simple here. I work sunup to sundown. Ruthie helps with chores, suppers at dusk. Sundays we go to town, unless weather says otherwise." Elena nodded, hands twisting in her skirt. "And," Asher added, the weight of his own tension edging into his voice, "I need honesty. No secrets. No surprises." He looked at her directly. "I've had enough surprises for a lifetime." Elena's breath caught. For a moment she looked like she wanted to laugh. Just one bitter, broken sound, but she didn't. She steadied her voice instead. "I'll do what I can," she said. "Truly. But secrets, they're the only reason I'm still breathing." Asher stiffened. "What does that mean?" "It means," she whispered, staring at the stove as if afraid to meet his eyes, "if I'd told the wrong truth back home, I wouldn't have lived long enough to take that train." The room went quiet. The kind of quiet that sits heavy on the chest. Ruthie knelt beside the hearth, striking flint harder than necessary. Sparks flew, catching on the tinder. She didn't look at Elena once. Asher rubbed the back of his neck. He wanted neat answers, clean lines, a simple bride to fill a simple life. Instead, his house had just become a crossroads of someone else's ghosts. He picked up the kettle. "We'll talk more tomorrow. It's been a long day." Elena lingered by the table. "I don't want trouble, Asher. I truly don't." He didn't answer. Couldn't. Not when his head felt like it had been kicked by a mule. Ruthie finally got the fire going. A small glow spread across the room, warming the edges of the evening. Asher showed Elena to the corner bed, Isabel's bed, in the plan he'd imagined. The thought made something inside him twist. "Ruthie sleeps in the loft," he said. "You'll stay down here until we figure things out." Elena touched the quilt lightly, almost tenderly. "It's more than I had yesterday." Asher nodded once and stepped back. Night settled fast. Ruthie climbed into the loft, deliberately avoiding a good night. Asher hung his coat by the door, meaning to sit for a bit, but exhaustion dragged at him. He walked out to the porch, needing cold air more than sleep. Inside, Elena stood alone. She waited until she heard Asher's footsteps fade before sinking onto the edge of the bed. She let out a breath she'd been holding since the station. The ledger rested in her lap, its leather cracked, edges singed, pages swollen from water damage. She opened it slowly, the way someone opens a wound they've kept stitched shut too long. Ink blurred in places, names crossed out, numbers smudged, trails of tear stains she'd forgotten she left. Her fingers hovered over one page, the one she'd nearly torn out so many times she'd worn a groove in the paper. She pressed her thumb against it. "Isabel," she whispered, voice trembling. "I'm trying. I promise I'm trying." A loose sliver of paper slipped out from between the pages and fluttered to the floor. Elena froze. It wasn't one of her notes. It was a scrap of someone else's handwriting. Scratched, urgent, familiar enough to send a cold shock through her chest. She picked it up, read it. Her breath stuttered. She folded it fast, shoved it back into the ledger, and hugged the book to her chest like she could hold the past still if she squeezed hard enough. Overhead, the loft creaked as Ruthie turned over. Elena lay down, pulling the quilt over her shoulders. She stared at the ceiling beams, listening to the faint whistle of wind through the eaves. This house didn't feel safe yet, but it didn't feel like New Mexico either. Somewhere between those two truths, her heart found a sliver of space to breathe. Outside, Asher leaned against the post, rubbing his tired eyes. He didn't know what tomorrow would bring, only that he'd invited a stranger into his home, and she carried more shadows than a woman her age ought to. He sighed into the cold. "Lord," he muttered, "what have I gotten us into?" And inside, Elena closed her eyes tight. She was wondering the same thing. Dawn crept over Kane Ridge in a thin silver line, slipping through the gaps in the shutters and brushing across Elena's face. She opened her eyes slowly, feeling the weight of the night still sitting on her chest. For a moment, she didn't know where she was, only that it was quiet, too quiet, and silence like this had never meant safety where she'd come from. Then the faint creak of floorboards above reminded her. Ruthie in the loft. Asher outside, probably already at the barn. A strange house. A borrowed bed. A new life she didn't yet know how to carry. Elena pushed herself upright, wincing at the stiffness in her ribs. She touched the bruise near her collarbone, then let her fingers fall away. No point checking what she already knew hurt. The ledger lay where she'd tucked it under the pillow. She slipped it into her carpet bag before stepping to the stove. She didn't want Asher or Ruthie to see it. Not yet. The kitchen felt colder than the outside air. Elena fumbled for matches, determined to make breakfast before Ruthie could come down and judge her for breathing too loudly. She didn't know how to be the kind of woman in those letters, Isabel's letters, but she could at least try. She managed to light the stove, but everything after that went sideways. The coffee boiled over. The bacon burned in less than a minute. The skillet popped hot grease onto her wrist. And when she tried flipping the biscuits, one flew across the room and hit the wall with a sad little thud. Her heart pounded. Her hands shook. "Please," she whispered to herself. "Just work. Just once." The smell of burning finally reached the loft. Ruthie's feet thudded down the ladder. She stopped halfway, eyes wide. "What are you doing?" "Trying," Elena said, brushing flour off her skirt. "To make breakfast." Ruthie stared at the stove like it was witnessing a crime. "It smells like something died in here." Elena swallowed hard. "I know." Ruthie climbed the last few steps, arms crossed. Miss Isabel said in the letters she made fresh biscuits every morning. Elena's breath hitched. Isabel knew how. "I don't." Ruthie didn't reply. The silence stung more than the words she might have thrown. Elena turned back to the skillet, blinking against the smoke. Ruthie finally sighed. "Move." She grabbed a spoon and scraped the worst of the burnt pieces into a bucket. "If Uncle Asher sees this, he'll think you're trying to poison us." A strangled laugh slipped from Elena before she could stop it. "It does look that way." Ruthie tried to hold her frown, but her mouth twitched, just a little. "Well, maybe we can save the eggs." Elena cracked 2 eggs into a pan, nearly dropping one. Ruthie rolled her eyes but didn't walk away. Together, awkward, uneven, messy, they managed something resembling a meal. When Asher pushed open the door, shaking off the cold, the smell hit him first. He froze. What happened in here? Ruthie pointed at Elena. She tried to cook breakfast. Asher's gaze moved from the smoke-stained skillet to the flour-covered counter, then to Elena, hair tousled, lashes still damp from earlier frustration, apron tied crooked around her waist. Something softened in his face. Maybe it was the effort he saw. Maybe it was the stubbornness. Maybe it was the way she didn't shrink from the mess she'd made. Well, Asher said slowly, did any of it survive? Elena lifted a plate of scrambled eggs that were slightly too pale and slightly too wet. These did. Ruthie held up a biscuit that was only half burned. And this one. Asher let out a breath, almost a laugh. Good enough, he said. They sat at the table. The plates clattered softly. Ruthie pushed food around at first, pretending not to enjoy it. Elena kept her eyes on her own meal, nervous she'd hear someone gag. But Asher took a bite and nodded. Tastes fine? Ruthie glanced up at him, then at Elena, then finally took a bite herself, chewing slowly, dramatically, before shrugging. It's not terrible. Elena's shoulders loosened so suddenly she almost sagged. Thank you, she murmured. For a moment, a small, fragile one, the three of them sat together like they'd done it 100 times. Like someone hadn't just lied her way into their lives. Like the ranch wasn't full of ghosts and questions. Asher set his fork down. His voice was low, even. We'll figure things out, he said. One day at a time. Elena met his eyes, startled by the gentle certainty in them. For the first time since stepping off the train, something inside her warmed. A tiny ember. Nothing more. But it was enough to make her believe she might survive one more day. And sometimes, out here, one more day was everything. The cold hadn't lifted by noon, but Asher decided they couldn't postpone the supply run any longer. The ranch was low on flour and lamp oil, and Ruthie needed new boot soles before the next freeze. Elena insisted she should stay behind, but Asher shook his head. You live here now, he said. Town's got to see you sooner or later. Elena didn't argue. She wrapped her shawl tighter, hiding as much of her bruised cheek as she could. Ruthie walked ahead, stiff-backed, pretending she wasn't watching Elena from the corner of her eye. Dustfell was busier than usual. A cattle drive was passing through, filling the air with dust and the shouts of trail hands. May's boarding house stood at the center, its porch crowded with women hanging laundry and gossiping like it was paid labor. Asher tied the wagon near the post office and motioned for the two to follow. Ruthie headed straight for Johnson's Leatherworks. Asher turned toward May's store. Elena kept close, steps small, breathing shallow. Inside, the warmth hit her first, then the smell, coffee, pine soap, and something frying in the back. May stood behind the counter, counting coins with the pride of someone who liked the sound of money. She didn't look up until Elena stepped inside, and then she froze. Well? May's voice sharpened like a butcher's knife. If it isn't the mystery bride. Asher bristled, but he kept his tone steady. We're just here for flour and oil. May didn't answer. Her gaze had locked onto something on the wall behind Elena. Something new, nailed up crooked, edges still crisp. A poster, fresh printed, fresh glued, fresh enough to smell the ink. And Elena's own face stared back at her from it. May's breath hitched before she read it aloud, loudly for everyone to hear. Elena Carrillo, wanted for aiding the transport of illegal arms, suspected in the deaths of 3 men, escaped custody near Las Cruces. Reward, $300. The room stilled. Even the frying pan in the kitchen seemed to go quiet. Elena didn't move, didn't breathe. Her eyes stayed fixed on the poster. Asher's jaw hardened. He didn't step away from her, but he didn't step closer either. A ranch hand near the stove let out a low whistle. Well, ain't that something? Kane, you brought home a fugitive. Another man stood. $300 is $300. We ought to hold her till the Marshal gets here. Elena's heart hammered so hard, she thought it might bruise her ribs from the inside. She forced out words, her voice shaking. I didn't kill anyone. A woman by the shelves snorted. That's what they all say. Asher moved then, slow, deliberate, placing himself between Elena and the men closing in. You'll settle down, he said. His voice wasn't loud, but it carried weight. No one touches her. And why's that? The ranch hand asked. You the law now? No, Asher said. But this is still my wife. The word hung there. Strange, heavy, not quite true, but true enough to stop the room from erupting. Elena's breath slipped out in a sharp, painful rush. She hadn't expected him to claim her. Not today. Not like this. The man hesitated, eyes flicking from Asher's steady stance to the rifle mounted above the door. He backed down first. May crossed her arms. You bringing trouble into this town, Kane. Big trouble. Maybe, he said. But it's my trouble to manage. He grabbed the sack of flour himself, dropped coins on the counter, and guided Elena out before another word could spark a fire. Outside, the air tasted like dust and judgment. Elena nearly stumbled getting into the wagon, her legs shaking so badly she had to grip the seat to stay upright. Asher climbed in beside her. Ruthie returned, clutching her new soles, and froze when she saw Elena's face, drained of all color. What happened? Ruthie asked. Asher didn't answer at first. He flicked the reins, sending the wagon rolling away from the curious eyes and whispers growing behind them. Finally, he said quietly, there's a poster. Ruthie's eyes widened. For what? Nothing good, Asher muttered. Elena swallowed hard. I didn't mean for any of this to reach your home, she whispered. I swear it. Ruthie pulled her coat tighter, shifting away. They don't put your face on posters for nothing. The words cut, deep. Elena looked down at her hands, hands that once copied numbers into ledgers without knowing they recorded death. She felt the old shame rise in her throat. But this time she didn't cry. She didn't run. She just sat there, letting the truth settle like dust on her skin. Asher kept his eyes forward, jaw clenched. He didn't believe the poster, not fully. But he didn't know what to believe either. And that uncertainty was its own kind of storm. The wagon ride back to Kane Ridge was quieter than any grave Asher had ever dug. Ruthie sat with her arms folded so tightly it looked like she was holding herself together by force. Elena kept her face turned toward the window, watching the sagebrush blur into cold streaks of green and gray. Asher didn't speak, didn't look at her, didn't trust his own voice to come out steady if he tried. By the time they reached the ranch, the sun was sliding low, the air sharp with the smell of iron and pine. Asher helped Ruthie down first. He didn't offer a hand to Elena, not out of cruelty, but because he didn't know where the line stood anymore. Inside, he set the flour on the counter, then braced his hands against the wooden surface. His shoulders rose and fell once. Then he said, quietly but firmly, "Sit down." Elena obeyed. She perched on the edge of the wooden chair like someone expecting a sentence, not a conversation. Ruthie hovered near the door frame, pretending she wasn't listening. Asher finally turned to face Elena. His eyes were tired in the way a man gets when every direction he looks hurts. "I can't protect what I don't understand," he said. "And right now, I understand damn near nothing." Elena swallowed. "What do you want to know?" Asher's jaw ticked. "Start with the poster." Her fingers curled in her lap. She lifted her chin, fighting the tremor in it. "I didn't kill anyone," she said. "But I did keep the books for people who did." Asher's brows knit together. "Books?" "My employers transported shipments," she said. She didn't have to say the word weapons. It hung in the silence anyway. "I thought it was legal at first. Then I found out who they were selling to. And by then, I was too deep." Ruthie edged closer, her breath held. "Who were they selling to?" Asher asked. Elena looked at him. Really looked. "I don't know all the names. They didn't tell me that part. They just said to write down the quantities and dates and sign for delivery." She reached slowly into her shawl and pulled out the leather-bound ledger, the same one Asher had seen her clutch like a lifeline since the day she stepped off the train. It looked harmless, just a book. But Asher felt something in his gut twist when she set it on the table. Elena opened it to a page marked with a frayed ribbon. Numbers, dates, initials. Neat handwriting that didn't belong to someone running for her life. She pushed it toward him with both hands. Asher hesitated. Then he pulled the ledger closer. His eyes skimmed the pages, not grasping anything at first. Then he found a familiar string of numbers, a familiar date. His breath stopped. The night his brother's supply train was hit. The night the law called it a robbery. The night Asher buried the only family he had left. Elena didn't miss the way his face changed. She whispered, "I didn't know. Not then." Asher shut the ledger, not harshly, but like it was something hot. He pushed it back toward her. "Why didn't you burn this?" he asked. "Because it's the only thing proving I didn't plan any of it," she said. "And the only thing proving what they did." "They," he said. She looked down. "Marshal Hale, and the men working under him." Ruthie gasped quietly. Asher didn't move. "Hale," he repeated, voice flat. "You're telling me Marshal Hale, the same man Dustfell thinks walks on water, was part of this?" Elena nodded once. "He ran the shipments. Isabel and I just handled the paperwork. Until the explosion." "Elena." She clasped her hands so hard her knuckles went white. "Asher, I know what this looks like. I know how it feels. I know you think I helped kill your brother." Asher didn't answer. He couldn't. His throat had closed up. Elena drew a shaky breath. "But I swear to you," she said softly, "I didn't choose any of it. I was surviving. And Isabel paid the price for both of us." For the first time, her voice broke on the name. Silence settled again, thicker than before, heavy as snowfall on a roof about to collapse. Asher scrubbed a hand over his face, pacing once across the kitchen. Ruthie watched him like she was watching a fuse burn down. Finally, Asher stopped, turned, and said, "I don't know what to do with any of this, but I'm not handing you over to Hale. Not yet." Elena's breath caught. Hope and dread tangled together. "And why not?" she whispered. Asher's voice came out low. "Because whatever happened back then, whatever part you did or didn't play, Hale wants you too badly, and a man like that doesn't hunt innocent people." He looked at her fully then, for the first time since the poster. And I need to know why. Marshal Hale rode into Dustfell the way a preacher walks into a church he already owns. Calm, slow, certain the walls will bend around him. His badge glinted even in the weak winter sun, and the townsfolk straightened their backs when they saw him, the way people do around a man whose authority can ruin or rescue them. He tied his horse outside May's place, dusted his gloves, and stepped inside like he'd been expected. "Marshal!" May sang out, too loudly, too sweetly. "We've had some excitement today." "I heard," Hale replied, voice warm as whiskey in a winter mug. "Thought I'd ride in, help clear the air." He read the room. Faces flushed with gossip, fear, eagerness. Dustfell was already primed. He hadn't even opened his mouth yet. He moved toward the poster of Elena on May's wall, tilted his head, and gave a sigh so rehearsed it might as well have been printed on the paper. "Poor thing," he murmured. "Young lady makes one wrong choice, ends up hunted across half the territory. Breaks my heart every time." A ranch hand spoke up. "Reward's still real, ain't it?" "Oh, it's real," Hale said smoothly. "But I'm hoping she'll come quietly. No one needs to get hurt." The room nodded, charmed and obedient. Jonas Mitchell entered then, still dusty from patrol. He paused when he saw Hale, then touched the brim of his hat. "Marshal." "Deputy." Hale smiled. "Come walk with me." Jonas followed him out. Hale's boots clicked steady on the boards. They stopped near the horses. "You saw the poster?" Hale asked. Jonas nodded. "Yes, sir." "Good. Saves me a conversation." Hale pulled on his gloves again. "I'll be riding up to Kane Ridge. Need to retrieve the girl. Kane's harboring her." Jonas hesitated. "Asher. Sir, he's not the type who—" Hale cut him off politely. "He'll understand once I explain. People do when the law makes things plain." Jonas didn't answer. Hale didn't need him to. Within minutes, the marshal was riding up the ridge trail, alone but carrying the confidence of a man who'd never once needed backup. Asher saw him coming long before the horse reached the yard. He stood on the porch, arms crossed, jaw locked tight enough to crack a molar. Elena stood in the doorway behind him. She wasn't breathing right. Ruthie gripped her hand, though she'd never admit she needed to. Hale dismounted like this was his land, not Asher's. "Kane," he greeted, smile courteous but thin. "Mind if I come inside a minute? Just a little matter to clear up." "You can talk right here," Asher said. Hale's eyes flicked to Elena. "Afternoon, Miss Carrillo." Elena tried to hide behind Asher's shoulder. Hale noticed. Hale noticed everything. "I'm here on official business," Hale continued. "But I'd prefer a peaceful resolution. Dustfell's had enough trouble already." "What business?" Asher asked. Hale removed his gloves with slow, measured motions. "Your bride there is wanted on federal charges. You surely saw the poster." Before Asher could answer, Elena whispered, "Don't let him." Hale held up a hand. "Ma'am, please. I'm not here to debate your innocence. That'll be for a judge." Something snapped tight in Asher's chest. Not anger. Not exactly. Something colder. Hale went on. "Now, I'll take her into custody, escort her to Santa Fe, she'll get her hearing, and Kane," he smiled, "you'll be doing your civic duty. Folks will see you as a good man." "You done?" Asher asked. Hale blinked. "I'm offering you the clean road, son." "Then I'll speak plain," Asher said. "You don't step foot in my house." That smile on Hale's face twitched, but didn't fall. Instead, he leaned slightly forward, like sharing a secret only Asher deserved to hear. You know, Hale said softly, I once investigated a train robbery. Ugly business, lives lost, supplies stolen. I still remember a boy crying over his brother's grave. Asher froze. Hale watched the color drain from him. Then he continued, voice almost kind. Never did catch the men who arranged that shipment. Elena whispered something sharp under her breath, but the blood roaring in Asher's ears drowned it out. And in the next heartbeat, struck Asher like a fist. A memory buried for years ripped open. A voice shouting orders by the tracks, a gunshot. A man with a scar along his right hand. A man whose voice matched the one standing in front of him now. Asher's throat closed. Hale saw it. He liked what he saw. Well, Hale said lightly, slipping his gloves back on. I'll return tomorrow for the girl. Maybe by then you'll have come to your senses. He tipped his hat to Elena, mocking, and walked back to his horse. Asher didn't move until Hale was a speck down the ridge. Elena touched his arm. Asher, what did he say to you? Asher didn't answer, because the truth was simple and terrible. He finally knew why Hale wanted her quiet, and why his brother had never come home. The house felt colder after Hale left, though the fire still burned in the stove. Ruthie slipped to her room without a word, leaving Asher and Elena in a silence that hummed like a live wire. Asher paced once, twice, then stopped in the middle of the kitchen, hands on his hips, shoulders stiff as barn beams. Elena stood near the table, fingers knotted in her skirt. She looked smaller somehow, like the news had hollowed her out from the inside. Asher, she tried. He didn't answer. He didn't trust himself to. She took a breath anyway. Whatever he said out there, it's not the whole truth. That so? Asher finally turned toward her, his voice rougher than he meant. Because it sounded pretty damn clear to me. Elena flinched as if he'd struck her. You think I wanted him here? I don't know what you want, Asher snapped. Hell, I don't know who you are. Elena's chin trembled, but she held his gaze. I told you what I did. I showed you the ledger. And it nearly got my brother killed. The words came out sharp, unfiltered. Or did you forget that part? Her lips parted, shocked, wounded. Asher, I didn't even know your brother existed. Doesn't change the fact he's dead, Asher said, voice low, dangerous. And the same numbers you wrote down are tied to the night he never came home. The air cracked between them. Elena stepped back, hand gripping the edge of the table. If you think I'm the reason, I don't know what to think, he cut in. Every time I try to make sense of it, something else blows up in my face. She swallowed hard. I never meant to bring this to your door. Well, you did, he said. You brought Hale. You brought the law. You brought danger to Ruthie, to me, to this whole damn ranch. Elena's eyes filled, but no tears fell. She held them back with a will that looked painful. If you want me gone, just say it. Asher didn't answer right away. He walked past her, bracing his hands on the counter, like if he didn't hold on to something, he might break apart. Finally, he said, I want the truth. That's all I've ever wanted. I gave you the truth, she whispered. Did you? His voice rose, not loud, but deep enough to shake the walls inside her. Because every time I turn around, there's some new piece of your past crawling out of the dark. That past wasn't my choice, but it's sure as hell my problem now. Elena closed her eyes. The words cut deeper than Hale's threats ever had. She took a shaky breath. Asher, I came here because I had nowhere left. Because I thought maybe, just maybe, if someone saw me as more than the worst thing I ever touched, I could start over. And what? Asher asked. You think I'm that someone? You were kind, she said. You were steady. You didn't treat me like filth. Asher let out a humorless laugh. Maybe. That was before I knew what followed you. That did it. Her composure snapped like a rope under strain. She stepped forward. You think I asked for Hale to hunt me? You think I wanted to be the last Carrillo standing? You think I wanted to hold Isabel's hand while she died choking on smoke from a fire he set? Asher froze. Elena's voice broke, raw. That ledger isn't a record of what I did to people. It's a record of what he did to us. Asher. She reached for him. I am not your enemy. His eyes met hers. Stormed, conflicted, hurting. You might not be, he said, voice low. But you sure as hell ain't someone I can trust right now. Elena's hand dropped to her side. She stepped back once, twice. Then she whispered the softest, most devastating words she'd said all night. Maybe you should have left me on that platform. The room went deathly still. Asher's throat tightened. The words echoed back at him like a shot he hadn't meant to fire. He looked away, unable to face the hurt he'd carved into her. Elena didn't cry, didn't plead, didn't explain further. She simply walked to her small room, shut the door quietly, and pressed her forehead to the wood. Breathing through the kind of pain that doesn't scream, Asher stayed in the kitchen, staring at the knots in the table's grain like they held answers he'd lost long ago. Ruthie watched from the shadow of the hallway, eyes wide, heart pounding, understanding for the first time that grown-ups could break each other without ever raising a hand. And somewhere far down Dustfell Road, Marshal Hale rode with a smile on his lips, because he knew exactly what he had just done. He hadn't fired a bullet. He'd fired doubt. And it hit its mark. The snow hadn't started yet, but the air smelled like it would. A heavy, metallic stillness settled over Kane Ridge as dawn crawled toward the horizon. Elena stood in that half-light, shawl wrapped tight, boots silent on the frosted ground. She held the leather ledger under one arm, like it was the only thing left in the world that still belonged to her. Inside the house, Asher's words still rang, sharp enough to bruise the places Hale couldn't touch. Maybe you should have left me on that platform. Maybe she should have. Elena paused at the barn door, her breath trembling out in a cloud. If she left now, before the ridge woke, before the Marshal returned, she could spare Asher the choice he clearly didn't want to make. No more danger, no more shame, no more lies tangled around his dead brother. She lifted the latch quietly, but the door wouldn't budge. Something pushed it back from the inside. No, someone. Ruthie stood there, small, pale and shaking, boots barely tied, hair wild from sleep. She looked like she'd run here the second she heard the floorboards creak. You're leaving, she said. Not a question, a verdict. Elena's heart folded in on itself. Ruthie, go inside, sweetheart. No, Elena swallowed. Your uncle, he's hurting. He's angry. I should go before... Before what? Ruthie snapped, her voice cracking. Before he loses somebody else? Elena froze. The girl hugged her own elbows, trying to look fierce, failing completely. You think running makes it better? You think it fixes anything? Ruthie, Elena whispered, I bring danger with me. You saw the poster. You heard him. Hale won't stop. If I stay, he'll use you. He'll twist Asher. He already did. Ruthie's voice broke open. And you didn't even fight back. That hit harder than Elena expected. Ruthie reached into her coat pocket with trembling fingers and pulled out a folded paper, worn at the edges, smudged from being handled too much. She pressed it against Elena's chest. You dropped this, Ruthie said, in the kitchen, last night. Elena felt the world tilt. No, not that page, not that letter. Ruthie looked up, eyes bright with something too old for her age. I read it. Elena's knees nearly gave out. Ruthie, you shouldn't have. You wrote to your sister. Ruthie's voice softened, but the pain in it deepened. You told her you'd take the blame for everything, so she could leave, so she could live. Elena closed her eyes. That night came back in pieces. Isabel's trembling hands, the flicker of lantern light, the soot on the windows, the sound of Hale's boots in the hall. Ruthie stepped closer. You didn't run then. Why are you running now? Because I failed. Elena's voice came out hollow. Isabel died anyway, and now I might get you hurt too. Ruthie shook her head fiercely. She died because bad men made her, not because of you. Elena let out a ragged breath. Your uncle doesn't see it that way. No, Ruthie said. He sees what Hale wants him to see. That doesn't mean it's true. Elena felt the letter trembling in her hand. Her handwriting stared back at her, broken, desperate, soaked in guilt. Let them think it was me, Isa. Just go. Don't look back. Ruthie lifted her chin. If you leave, he'll think you're guilty, and he'll hate himself for letting you go. I can't be the reason he loses the ranch, Elena whispered. You won't be. Ruthie's voice steadied. But if you walk away, you'll be the reason he loses himself. The words cut clean through Elena's defenses. Ruthie wasn't done. She pointed at the ledger clutched under Elena's arm. That book, Asher needs it. Even if he doesn't know it yet. Even if he's too mad to see straight. Elena felt tears burn behind her eyes, but they didn't fall. They never fell easily. Ruthie, she said softly, I'm not someone worth fighting for. The girl took a breath. Small, shaky, but brave. That's not true, Ruthie said. I've watched you. You don't lie good. You don't hurt people on purpose. You try. Even when it hurts. Even when you're scared. She stepped even closer, voice barely more than a whisper. And I don't want you to go. Something inside Elena broke. Not the painful kind, but the kind that lets light get in. She crouched to Ruthie's height, hand hovering, unsure if she was allowed. Ruthie made the choice for her, throwing her arms around Elena's neck, holding tight. Elena shut her eyes. The hug hurt. The hug healed. When Ruthie finally pulled back, she wiped her nose on her sleeve and said, If you run now, you'll be doing what Hale wants. Elena drew in a long, steadying breath. For the first time since stepping off the train at Dustfell, she didn't feel like she was standing alone on sinking ground. She folded the letter carefully and tucked it back into the ledger. I'll stay, she said. Ruthie exhaled in relief so big it shook her shoulders. Good. Elena rose, wiping her palms on her skirt. But staying means fighting. Ruthie nodded. Then let's fight. And in the soft, gray light of that cold morning, Elena Carrillo walked back toward the house. Not as a runaway, but as someone who had chosen to stay. He'd become the kind of man he despised. The ridge woke slowly that morning, as if the cold weighed down every shadow. Asher had barely slept, When he dragged himself outside to split kindling, his eyes looked like they'd been carved out by worry. He hadn't spoken to Elena, hadn't knocked on her door, hadn't said a word to Ruthie either. He just swung the axe again and again, trying to cleave through thoughts that refused to break. The sound of hooves reached him first, soft at a distance, then louder, then many, too many. Asher froze, breath turning white. Elena stepped out onto the porch behind him, Ruthie clinging to the doorframe. Elena's hair was still unbraided, a sign she'd dressed in a hurry. "What is it?" she asked, though the dread in her voice said she already knew. Asher turned toward the ridge road. A column of riders descended the trail, Hale out front, Jonas behind him, and nearly a dozen townsfolk trailing like a makeshift militia. Some had rifles, some just carried rope. But all had the same look in their eyes. This time, they'd come for blood. Elena's breath hitched. Ruthie grabbed her hand. Asher didn't move at first. He looked at the riders, then at Elena, then at the ground, like the dirt might offer him a way out. It didn't. He stepped forward, slowly, deliberately. He didn't grab a gun, didn't shout, didn't run. He just walked to the center of the yard and planted his boots in the snow like he was nailing himself to the earth. Hale pulled his horse to a stop 10 paces away, wearing the kind of smile men use when they think the ending is already written. "Kane," Hale said warmly, "I see you've made your decision." Asher didn't blink. "I have." Hale nodded as if pleased. "Good. Then step aside." "No." The word wasn't loud, but it was final. Hale tilted his head. "Son, I don't think you understand the situation. The girl is a fugitive. These good men here," he gestured back at the riders, "are ready to do their civic duty. Don't make this harder than it needs to be." Asher's jaw flexed. "If you want to take her, you'll need to go through me." A murmur rippled through the group. Shock, confusion, fear. Hale's smile thinned. "Why? Why put your neck on the line for a woman who lied her way into your home?" Asher lifted his chin. "Because people lie to survive. But you," his voice dropped into something colder, "you lie to bury the truth." Jonas stiffened in his saddle. Hale's eyes flickered. Asher stepped forward one more pace. "You don't want justice. You want silence." The air snapped tight like a snare. Hale abandoned the charm. "Kane, don't be a fool. She's dangerous." "No," Asher said. "You are." A few townsmen shifted uneasily. Jonas looked down at his hands, guilt sitting heavy on his shoulders. Hale clicked his tongue. "Boys," he called over his shoulder. "Secure the girl." The riders began to dismount. Ruthie cried out, "Uncle Asher!" Elena didn't move. Her fingers dug into Ruthie's coat as if holding the child was the only thing keeping her upright. Asher raised a hand, not in surrender, but to halt the crowd. "You all know me," he said, voice steady but charged. "You've known my family for years. You know I bury my dead with my own hands, and you know I don't stand in the way of the law." He paused, just long enough for the silence to hold its breath. "But today," Asher said, "the law ain't what's standing in front of me." Jonas looked up sharply. The townsfolk faltered. Asher pointed at Hale. "That man has reasons for wanting her gone that he won't speak out loud. And if you follow him now, you're not serving Dustfell." His voice hardened. "You're serving a devil wearing a badge." A shock ran through the riders. Some angry, some scared, some suddenly unsure of the truth they came here to believe. Hale's jaw twitched. "That's enough." "No," Asher said. "It's not." He stepped closer, boots crunching the snow. Elena doesn't run today. She doesn't get dragged off like an animal, and she sure as hell doesn't die on my land. Hale's hand hovered near his gun. You are obstructing justice. Asher's eyes didn't waver. Then take me first. The words echoed across the yard, quiet, fierce, final. Elena's breath broke in her chest. Ruthie's grip tightened. The riders stopped moving. Jonas stared at Asher like he'd never seen him before, and Hale, for the first time, lost a sliver of control. Asher, Elena whispered behind him. You don't have to. Yes, he said, still staring at Hale. I do. Not because she was innocent. Not because he'd forgiven her. Not because he understood everything. But because he couldn't look Ruthie in the eyes again if he chose cowardice over conscience. And because somewhere deep in his bones, he knew if he let Hale take her. The yard was so still, you could hear the wind scrape frost off the fence rails. Every rider had one hand on their reins, the other hovering near their belts, not grabbing their guns, but close enough to mean they could. Hale's horse stamped the snow, sensing the tension rolling off its rider. Elena Carrillo, Hale called out, voice carrying like a noose thrown across the yard. Step forward. Kneel. Hands behind your head. Elena didn't move. Ruthie squeezed her hand hard enough to hurt. Don't, she whispered. Please don't. But Elena knew what Hale wanted. He wanted defiance. One flicker of rebellion so he could shoot her in the open and call it lawful. So she stepped forward anyway. Slow. Careful. Asher, she whispered without turning. Stay back. He didn't listen. He moved with her. Hale's lip curled. Alone, Miss Carrillo. The law doesn't need an escort. Elena inhaled once, then gently pried Ruthie's fingers free. She stepped out into the yard, snow crunching under her boots. Her hands lifted, palms open, showing she carried nothing but her breath. Behind her, Asher's jaw clenched until a vein pulsed in his temple. Hale nodded, pleased. There we go. Now kneel. Elena's knees bent, but before they touched the ground, Hale raised his gun and fired a shot into the snow. The bullet hit inches from Ruthie's foot. Ruthie screamed. Elena gasped. Asher snapped. You son of a... He lunged, but two of the riders lifted rifles, blocking the move. Dust rose where the bullet had struck, floating like burnt parchment in the cold air. Ruthie stumbled back, eyes wide with terror. He aimed at me. No, Hale said smoothly, holstering the gun. Just a warning. Children ought to stay out of grown folks' business. Asher's hands curled into fists. You try something like that again. You'll what? Hale cut in. Start a gunfight in front of half the town? A murmur rippled through the riders. Not one of them looked proud of what they were part of. Elena stood frozen, a tremor running through her arms. Every instinct screamed at her to run, but running now would make her guilty, make her the villain in Hale's story. And she refused to give him that. Hale scanned the yard, eyes gleaming with the satisfaction of a man who held all the cards. Now, he said quietly, Ms. Carrillo, kneel. She drew a breath, steadying herself. Then Jonas spoke. Marshal. Hale didn't turn. Not now, deputy. Jonas didn't stop. Marshal, you fired near a child. Hale stiffened. Mind your place, son. Jonas swallowed, throat tight. With respect, sir, this ain't the law. This is fear. Hale turned slowly in the saddle, his eyes cold enough to freeze water. You questioning my authority? Jonas looked at Ruthie, then at Asher, then at Elena standing alone in the yard, hands lifted like a ghost begging to be spared. His jaw trembled. Yes, he said. I am. The yard sucked in a collective breath. Hale's hand dropped to his holster with the ease of a man used to ending objections with bullets. You better think real careful about your next step. Jonas's hand moved too, but not toward his holster. He raised his gun and pointed it at Hale. Gasps broke from the riders. Asher froze mid-step. Elena's breath hitched painfully in her chest. Jonas, Asher whispered, disbelief cutting through the haze of fear. Jonas's voice shook, but his grip didn't. If law looks like you, Marshal, I'd rather be a sinner. Hale's eyes went dead and dark. You're making a mistake. No, Jonas said. I made mistakes every time I stayed quiet. He looked around at the men behind him. We all did. The riders shifted, unsure, no longer trusting the badge in front of them. One lowered his rifle a fraction. Another stepped back from Hale's horse. A small crack formed in the wall of fear Hale had built. Hale saw it. He snarled. You think they'll follow you, boy? You think they'll take your word over mine? Jonas didn't blink. I think they saw you aim at a child. A few men muttered, uneasy, ashamed. Hale's hand twitched. Put the gun down, Jonas. Last warning. Jonas lifted his chin. You first, sir. The standoff stretched so tight it felt like one breath could snap it in half. Asher moved then, not toward Hale, not toward Jonas, but toward Elena. He stepped beside her, shoulders squared, making it clear where he stood. Elena looked at him, eyes wide, breath trembling, and something settled in her chest. He wasn't letting her face this alone. Not anymore. The yard waited, silent, frozen, breathless, as the Marshal's finger curled around the trigger. The moment before a gunshot is its own kind of silence, a tight, waiting thing. A breath held by the whole world. Hale's finger tightened around the trigger, and Jonas didn't flinch, but Elena moved. She stepped in front of Asher, hands still raised from earlier, voice cracking through the frozen air. Stop! It wasn't loud, but it carried like a bell in the dead of winter. Hale's focus snapped to her. Get back, girl. No, Elena said, chest rising and falling. If you want someone to shoot, shoot me. I'm the one you're hunting. Asher's heart lurched. Elena. She didn't break her stare. This isn't about justice. It's about the ledger. It's about Isabel. A flicker, barely there, passed over Hale's face. Fear, recognition, guilt. Jonas saw it. So did Asher. And so did the men behind them. One rider whispered, Ledger? What ledger? Elena reached slowly into her shawl, pulled out the worn leather book, and held it in both hands like a Bible no one wanted to touch. This, she said softly, is what he wants. Not me. Hale hissed, Shut your mouth. But it was too late. Something inside the crowd shifted. Jonas's voice cracked the moment open. Marshal, is that why you wanted her dead? Hale snapped, She is a criminal. Then why didn't you arrest her at the station? Jonas shot back. Why wait until now? Why shoot at the child instead of the fugitive? A hush fell. Hale's jaw worked like a man chewing rocks. Enough! I'm ending this now. He raised his gun again, and Asher lunged, tackling him off the saddle. The shot fired wide, searing past Jonas's ear. Horses reared, men shouted, snow exploded under boots. The yard erupted into chaos. Asher and Hale rolled in the slush, fists connecting with sickening thuds. Hale swung like a man used to winning by force. Asher fought like a man who'd bled too much grief to lose another soul. Hale slammed an elbow into Asher's ribs, scrambled for his gun, and Jonas fired first, One shot. Clean. Not fatal. Hale fell, gripping his shoulder, shouting curses that had no law behind them anymore. The riders froze. The badge on Hale's chest didn't look like truth anymore. It looked like a lie coming undone. 2 hours later, Dustfell crowded into the church, its pews filled with tense, ashamed faces. Snow melted off boots, hats twisted in nervous hands. Whispers buzzed like trapped flies. This wasn't a trial. There wasn't time for that. It was a hearing, a reckoning held in the only place in town people still believed might keep them honest. Elena stood at the front beside Asher and Jonas, hands clasped so tightly the knuckles stood white. Jonas stepped forward first. His voice shook, but it carried. "I've been the Marshal's deputy 2 years. I've seen things that didn't sit right, and I stayed quiet. That ends today." He told them everything. How Hale used shipments to cover weapons deals. How complaints disappeared. How witnesses vanished. He didn't excuse himself. He didn't soften a word. When he finished, you could hear the rafters creak. Then Asher stepped up, ledger in hand. He opened it to the marked pages, reading dates and quantities tied to the night his brother died. His voice cracked once, but he kept going. "This book," he said, "wasn't written by a killer. It was written by someone who survived a killer." Elena stared at the floor, tears gathering at the corners of her eyes, but never falling. Jonas motioned her forward gently. "Tell them." Elena raised her head. Her voice was small, but steady. "Hale forced the ledger through Isabel and me. We copied every shipment. When Isabel tried to leave, he set fire to the safe house. She didn't make it out." The room gasped. Elena continued. "He blamed me, posted the bounty, hunted me across 3 territories." She swallowed. "I didn't run because I was guilty. I ran because I wanted to live." Silence, deep and heavy, filled the church. Judge Crawford stood then, wiping a hand down his beard. "Marshal Hale, you'll be transported to Santa Fe for full inquiry. Charges include corruption, weapon trafficking, and attempted murder." Hale snarled from where he sat bound on the pew. "You're all fools." But no one listened. Dustfell had seen enough. Weeks passed. Winter softened. News arrived that Hale had confessed to most charges. Others came forward. Elena's bounty was officially revoked. And one evening, as the last light slipped behind Kane Ridge, Asher found Elena sitting on the porch steps. He sat beside her, quiet for a long while. Then he placed the leather ledger on her lap. But now it was wrapped in a clean strip of blue ribbon. "For the family we're building," he said softly. "Not the one that hurt us." Elena's breath shook. "Asher." He touched her hand. "Just once. Just enough." "Stay," he whispered. "Not because you have nowhere else. Stay because you choose us." Ruthie pushed the door open behind them. "Can I write my name first?" Elena laughed. A sound brighter than winter had any right to hold. "Together," she said. And under the fading sky of Dustfell, the 3 of them bent over the ledger, writing names not of fear or guilt, but of a family finally found. And so, when the dust finally settled over Dustfell, something quiet, something good, seemed to return to the land. Asher, Elena, and little Ruthie did not forget the storms they had walked through, but they learned to live with the echoes, the way folks in the Old West always did, one day at a time, one sunrise at a time, with gentleness no one expected from a place so rough. The old ledger that once carried fear and loss now held the first lines of a new family, written slow, written honest, written together. And maybe that's the real heart of every Western tale. Not the gunfights or the danger, but the courage it takes to choose kindness after the world has tried its best to break you. If you've stayed with the story this far, I hope it brought back a memory or two, or warmed a corner of your heart tonight. I'd love to hear your thoughts. What part spoke to you most? Please share a comment. And if stories like this still mean something to you, feel free to like the video, subscribe for more Western love and Old West stories, and ring the bell so you won't miss the next tale by the fire. Thank you for being here with us.